might I say SharePoint is the most used data source for Power Apps? Kurt, do you have any statistics on that for me?
70% of polled
70%.
users use SharePoint.
That's a lot. So maybe not feel bad if it's like, oh, okay, well, I've been using SharePoint. I thought maybe I was in the minority. No, you're in the majority.
Which oftentimes means that you're in the side that causes some trouble, right? So you're in trouble.
Yeah.
If most people are doing something, maybe it's something you don't want to do.
Now, guys, if you're looking at SharePoint, you're doing well from the standpoint of you're not using Excel.
Leaps and bounds. Leaps and bounds.
Let's open up the pros here and let's see what we got. Most used data source. So you just told us 70%. That's interesting. You know that. And I think the reason why it's most used, no premium licensing required.
Yeah.
So, maybe you're thinking about Dataverse, maybe you're thinking about SQL Server, maybe you're thinking about MySQL. Some people don't even know you could use MySQL, which is an open source system, relational database management system, and also Postgres. But they all require premium licensing. What were we about to say, Kurt?
Well, oftentimes when we get potential clients or people coming up wanting some tutoring or they got questions about data sources, the first question we ask is, do you have premium licensing available? Oftentimes they say no. Well, then that just kind of locks you in. You got two choices, Excel, SharePoint, right? So, but then if you have premium license available, there's a lot of reasons why you may not want to do that.
It is ubiquitous. That means present, appearing, or found everywhere. I mean, if you're a Microsoft shop, if you're a company, a corporation that uses Microsoft 365, Office 365, whatever you want to call it, chances are you got SharePoint. They're using SharePoint as an intranet. And it's easy to go get permission from IT. Hey, can I get a SharePoint site out here? And it's much easier than getting something like that created, getting access, something created. Sometimes it's a little hard. It's like, why do you need a new site created? Now, I would suggest to people, hey, you should really create a SharePoint site per Power Apps application that you do. Okay. Now, if you're creating 3 apps and they all have to do the same data, okay, we'll just use one SharePoint site. Sometimes you'll get a little kickback from IT. It's like, well, your department already has a SharePoint site. And it's like, okay.
Well, if you're not going to, what's IT in the business of, Darren?
Saying no, not allowed, access denied.
Exactly. That's IT.
Don't you love hearing that? Yeah. What's that sound whenever you get access denied? Nina, no passing go. We have fun here, Kurt, don't we?
Yeah. It is true, though. There's so much truth to that.
And IT has got a general feeling it's safe for you to have that. Now, if they give you a SQL Server database, like, I don't know what they're going to do with that. That thing could grow up to 10 terabytes tonight. They just don't know. And why they freak out so much is, you mess it up, you do something wrong, and you can fill up a hard drive, and now things are down because it was on another hard drive with a critical application, and it's all on IT shoulders. And then people all are like, IT, get your act together. And that's what they like to say no so much. I've managed networks. I've worked in that area before, and you are responsible for having that network up and making it a fine, well-tuned machine. So I understand both sides. I really don't like being told no all the time, though.
No, and IT's got a main goal, and that is don't let your uniform get dirty. So if they go in there and all of a sudden their uniform gets dirty, they got to come in on weekend. They got problems. They're saying no. Yeah.
Yeah. It's much better than Excel. I'll tell you that right there.
Yeah, way better.
If you're looking at between those two things, definitely go with SharePoint. Much, much, much better. You can actually edit the SharePoint edit screen with Power Apps. Did you know that, Kurt?
No, that's something new. We're going to have to, that's a whole nother thing.
Somebody was hinting when I was first learning Power Apps. I'm like, no, I can write an app in Power Apps. I'm like, no, you create an app within SharePoint. I'm like, well, you can embed Power Apps in it. No, look at this, Kurt. Integrate Power Apps, customize forms.
Oh boy.
Oh, look, there's Power Automate. What can we do with Power Automate? Well, let's say if something changes, I want to create a flow and I want to be emailed every time something. Now there's other things in here like alert. Yeah, you can alert me, that type of stuff. But you can do some complex stuff with Power Automate.
Okay.
Power BI. Well, let's visualize the list.
Okay.
Power Platform is well integrated within SharePoint. So that's a plus. But Kurt, I just sort of want to knock your socks off here, man. Okay, are you ready for this? All right. So while that's coming up, Kurt, we're going to keep the ball rolling here. Okay. So your socks are going to get blown off there. Very little learning curve. It's not very difficult to know how to create a list within Power Apps. I'm sorry, within SharePoint. Doing it in Dataverse, there's a little bit more of a learning curve. And then SQL Server, there's a lot more of a learning curve. You can create indexes on views. So if you're going to be doing lots of searching on a particular column, create an index. Now, I won't go into that now. We could have a whole 10 or 20-minute video on just how to do that. And let's say you're going to be searching on an email field or something. Go ahead and create an index on one of those views. And we're talking about views. You can create multiple views. You can sort things a certain way. You can have them group by. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. Again, we could have a whole video on that. These views aren't quite as nice as a Dataverse or SQL Server view. It's been around for 20 years. I remember back in 2003 installing, it was back then there was an acronym, WSS, and I've forgotten what that even means. But those are all the pros. What about the cons?
Would that be a Windows SharePoint site? WSS?
Don't make me Google it. I don't think so.
Don't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah. And what I was going to say, it's been around for 20 years. That's actually also a con. I'm going to put that here. I thought I had that there. Maybe I didn't. Okay.
You did at the bottom, I think. Yeah.
So those are the cons. Before I go on to the cons, look at this. I'm in Power Apps, modifying the form here. Okay. And this is a form. Well, you can drop buttons on here, Kurt. Have your own buttons. Boom. And guess what you can do? On Slack, you can write your own code. You know what I really like to do? The first thing I do, if I'm going to modify a screen a lot, I will duplicate it. Always do that, right? Just in case you want to go back to it. I'm going to go to here, screen one, and I'm going to go scorched earth on this and just delete it. I'm going to delete this button. And look at that. What does that do for us, Kurt? Well, that allows me to, let me put a little label on here. And what I'll say is go to the Power Apps application to edit this data, please. Okay. That's how I use this. That's how I like it. I don't want people going in the SharePoint list, modifying this stuff. I'm going to make this blue. Pure blue, if I can get a pure blue here. So R0, G0, and B is 255. That gives us a pure blue. And I'm going to make this larger here. And I'm going to underline it. Now that looks like a link, right? So I'm going to save this. And sometimes it takes a while for this to like propagate back over to SharePoint. And what you want to do is on select property, you could do a launch, okay, on your Power Apps, and inside these double quotes, you put the link to the app, okay. So now if I say go back to SharePoint, I'm going to save and publish it. It should take me right back to SharePoint. Sort of a weird thing how it switches between SharePoint and Power Apps here. So now it takes probably a good 20 to 30 seconds for it to update. Okay. But if I were to click on this, see, it's got the old edit form there, right? But if I just keep doing this, I'll hit refresh on the browser here. And I'll click on this link. Oh, look at this. Fetching your app, starting your app, connecting. Oh, look at that. They can't edit it now, can they? What if instead of hitting this, I say new? Oh, go to the Power Apps. Oh, I guess I should probably do that. Does that blow your mind at all, Kurt?
It does. That's pretty smooth.
Especially for people who use Power Apps a lot. So they can view it. You can even probably lock down the view a little more. So we've got edit the current view. We can sort things. I'd like to turn off in the grid editing. Okay. But here's, you can check off all the columns. I mean, it creates a lot of columns for you. You may not even know that it was there.
Yeah, it keeps the innocent out of it, right? So, and then if you try to circumvent that and get in there anyway, well, then you're going to be responsible for some stuff, right? You're going to have to answer to somebody probably within the organization. So that's a good way of doing it, I think.
I mean, you do group buys, totals, styles, and what I'm looking for. I'm not trying to give you a lowdown on how to do this, but there is an edit in grid. If you can turn that off, that is the one security hole I see by doing this. If I hit cancel, I'm trying to get back to the list now. At versions, there we go. There's edit and grid view. Okay, this is a way they can circumnavigate or get around our little form there. They can go in here and modify this. Well, if you can turn that off, I've heard you can do that within the view settings, or you can create a new view that's very basic that doesn't maybe display anything. Because I think they can only modify what they have in here. So maybe that's something else that you can do. So I just wanted to bring that up. I like to lock down my SharePoint list as much as I can by doing that. But moving on to the cons, users can wander in your data and modify it directly. So that's what we're trying to keep them from doing there a few minutes ago. It can be secured, but it's what maybe you or me, we'd call that soft security. So what I like to do when I build apps is I like to create a separate site and all the lists in there. And I don't tell the users, oh, hey, you've got access to the site. They need access to this site. They need to be able to add and edit records. And because with a Power App, it passes through the credentials of the user to SharePoint. So they have to have access to do those. Now it's different with SQL Server and Dataverse. Well, that's a different video, a different day. But it's going to pass in their credentials. So if they don't have access to read, edit, right, then they're not going to. Your app won't be really of any use to them, right?
Right.
So they might be able to find it back there. So I'd call it soft security. May handle things that other relational database management systems like SQL Server do well. Okay, can you give me an example of things like that, Kurt?
Well, you just got it right there, record locking, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Any type of granular control, the security, you can lock down the rows. You want to handle this next bullet point here for us?
The creating parallel environments.
Yeah.
So it's really hard because it doesn't just automatically. There's no way to absolutely replicate the tables that you have created in one environment over to another environment. It's just there's just no way to do it. You almost have to have screenshots of the structures and put them in manually. And then of course you have data. Now, once you got the structures created, it's not too bad. Oftentimes
when
you
say structures, what are other words for that which you're trying to get at? When you mean structures?
Well, again, that's an RDBMS term, right? So in a list term, the columns. So that there is no way to replicate the columns without just going in by hand and creating those, within a new environment.
If I go into list settings, this is what I would call the schema, or what Kurt would call the structure, right?
Yeah.
So these are the fields. We got title, application name, app version, so on and so forth. Okay. And you've got the data type. Is it a single line of text? Is it a number? What exactly is there? So we call that schema or the structure. Back in the day, Kurt, you taught me DDL. You taught me DDL, dynamic data language, which allows you to create tables, modify columns with SQL code. All that allows you to modify the schema, right? So that's what we're talking about here. So we might want to have. So you want to do all your development in one spot, and you want your data to be your test data, maybe have a lot more data than just dev. And then your production, you don't want anybody putting test records in production, right? But SharePoint's your data source. Well, you sort of do need three, at least two, at least something separate for production, right?
Right.
But it's not very easy to do that. Sometimes people rely on other tools you know, and
It's
which
with
is sort of,
deploying. Deploying's not smooth either for the same reasons. Because if you're deploying, you're going to a different environment. Perhaps you're writing this program and you're wanting to sell it or rent it. You're going to have to go through all kinds of havoc trying to get those data structures across, those schemas, those lists.
yeah. And then what about import? Have you ever imported a spreadsheet or some data into a SharePoint list and noticed that like title, first name, last name, you try to reference it in Power Apps, you can't find it anywhere. You ever seen anything like that?
Then you got to go. Then you'll run across it somewhere, and it'll be some weird looking field. It's like, I didn't call it that. There's an underlying variable out there that you just don't have access to that it just automatically puts it towards.
Now, you see at the bottom. Now, if you create a SharePoint list as a data source, never rename your columns. And if you do, it's just a headache. Okay.
That means don't do that.
Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Right beside your face here, Kurt.
I see that. Application name.
Now, if that came across as field one, let's say we imported it and it came in as field one. I'm like, no, that's application name. And you called it, you go into Power Apps. Guess what it's going to do? It's going to say field one. Okay. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Just really quick. I'm going to do it really quick, Kurt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say misspelled. And I'm going to put a space in there. Putting spaces in list names and column names, I don't recommend. Guess what? In Power Apps, you got to put little single quotes around things like that. And it's a little bit of a pain. Don't put spaces in table names, list names, column names. Okay. And I'm just going to leave it as text. I'm going to hit OK. Okay. What do we have here? Misspelled columns. Do you see what we did here at the bottom? Oh, well, that's not really a problem, right? Oh, look at what it did when we had a space in there, misspelled space columns. It put an underscore, it put an X, it put a 0, another 0, a 2, another 0, and an underscore, just for a little innocent space in there.
Now, what is that number, Darren? X0020. What's that number?
That is the ASCII code.
What's the value though?
Space.
32.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
That's why we got Kurt in here, guys. He knows things I don't, and I know everything else that he doesn't.
That's why we make it low.
I'm going to digress for 10 seconds. So, you can buy a book on Amazon, and it's called Everything They Don't Teach You in Harvard Business School. Then there's another book that says everything they do teach you in Harvard Business School. And if you own both of those books and read them, you'll have all knowledge in the universe.
Wow. That's impressive.
Of course, I keyed. I go in here and I say, nope, this is going to be a simple field. I'm going to hit OK. Of course, my head is covering up the OK button, just FYI. Oh, look, now it's simple. It's simple. Oh, look at what it did. We are stuck with that field name, misspelled space columns. So, guys, it's not the easiest thing to work with, but it's better than Excel, right? So importing is not smooth. Renaming columns, don't even try.
We just saw what happens.
Yeah. So I have here been around for 20 years. Well, I've got it at the bottom, so I'll take that out. It's been around for 20 years and was not designed for Power Apps. Don't be using complex types, lookup fields. Now, lookups are good in Dataverse, okay? SQL Server doesn't have lookup columns. Don't use lookups. Don't use people pickers. And I would suggest doing other things. And, if you use, those lookup columns, there's so many other better ways to handle that type of stuff. And if you just go along with these complex types, a lot of times you'll have delegation problems. You're tempted to use types that makes Power Apps development difficult.
Hey, if you're getting anything helpful out of this, a comment or even a like really helps the channel and lets people like you know this is good content. Much appreciated.
Okay. And you can only have, if you try to pull in, let's say you've got more than 10 lookup columns. Can you imagine having more than 10 lookup columns inside of a SharePoint list? Anything out of that, Power Apps like, nope, it's got more lookup columns here than I can handle. I've actually seen that happen with somebody that they were trying to do all that. They brought it to me. I'm like, what? What are you doing?
Well, thank goodness Power Apps did that, because if you got more than 10 lookup columns in a table, you got something going on there, maybe.
Absolutely.
I think, though, that could you just talk about a complex data type? What is that?
Sure. Yeah. So let's create a new column here in my list, and I can call it whatever. Okay. Single line of text. That's a good. In fact, I'm going to zoom up in here. Okay.
So
that's going to be good.
That's a simple data
I'm
type.
going to get our faces out of the way. Okay. Multiple line of text. That's good. I recommend staying away from rich text. It will try to put a bunch of HTML stuff in there. So if I pick multiple lines of text, you'll find down here below, you want to select plain text, not this rich text. Okay. A choice. That's a complex type. I recommend staying away from those. There's a different way of doing that. Either create a separate table for that, or just if it never changes, then you just like define that collection inside your app.
Right. And this is kind of where I wanted to talk about real quick. So when you're looking at a choice or a complex data type, you're dealing with something that's more than just one type of a value. So let's look at choice. It could be like the status of something. It could be inactive. It could be new. It could be stalled. Whatever it is that you want to create that. But so now you're going to have to deal with those three choices everywhere within your Power App. And so you've got the choice data type, which is like a simple data type like text. But then you've got new stuff that's underneath that is the list of items that are in those choices. And then you have to compare each one of those every time to say, does this choice equal this? So there's a lot of work you have to do with those complex data types. I just want to recommend to stay away from complex data types wherever possible and let your apps do the work. But the way you have to handle these complex data types is not very nice in SharePoint.
Yeah. So look, okay. So number, that's a good simple type. Currency, I wouldn't mess around with currency. I've never tried, but why not just put it into a number? It can handle decimals.
Yeah.
And
in fact, that's probably the best one, decimal, as far as being a real number. Yeah.
Yeah. Keep in mind, every time you create a SharePoint list, it's going to create an ID field in there for you. It's going to be the primary key, and it's going to be an auto number, how an auto number works in Access. Or if you're familiar with SQL Server, it's called identity. So it typically starts off with 1. Your second row will be 2. And if you delete 1, nothing else takes that number, but it's an auto number. Date and time, that's good. Lookup, I'd stay away from lookup. That's a complex type. And then things change, and I got to say, okay, well, this thing looks up in some other table, but you don't want to do that. Now, I've got a lot of videos. If you guys have any questions on how to do foreign keys within your lists, it's definitely do a search on Darren East on YouTube, and maybe we'll create a dedicated video where we go more in depth on that. But don't do lookups. Yes, no, Booleans, they work really well. Now, what happens if you want to know if they didn't answer? So if they didn't check off a checkbox, were they saying no, or did they just bypass the answer, not answer? Well, you don't know. A Boolean only gives you 2 values. So it still works just fine. The yes, no, a lot better than Dataverse. Yes, no. Person or group, that's a complex type. A hyperlink or a picture. Why would a hyperlink and picture be together? I wouldn't mess with that. I would put a hyperlink into single or multiple lines of text. I put pictures actually in multiple lines of text, and I work with it as a base 64. I don't mess with the images. The calculate, I have done calculated stuff before. That's no big deal. Task outcome, never worked with. External data, I've never looked at. I use almost exclusively just simple types. Okay, guys?
Yep.
Well, that will conclude our look at SharePoint.
Guys, for some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, got to hurry. Click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video, which you probably don't want. Thanks.